Welcome to Zero Knowledge. I'm your host, Anna Rose. In this podcast, we will be exploring the latest in zero-knowledge research and the decentralized web, as well as new paradigms that promise to change the way we interact and transact online. This week, Tarun and I chat with Mert Mumtaz. Mert is the co-founder and CEO at Helius, and someone who is known on Twitter as one of the most vocal supporters of the Solana ecosystem. In our conversation, we cover Mert's connection to Solana, how he got his start, living through the crash at the end of 2022, Solana's recent regrowth, and discuss its positioning in the larger blockchain ecosystem today. We then take some time to do a survey of ZK projects emerging in the Solana ecosystem, covering ways that ZK is being used for scaling, privacy, as well as in the base layer to enable new functionality. This is something I've wanted to cover for a while now, so really glad I got a chance to dive in. We wrap up with a short chat about the past, present, and future of speculative assets, the impact of meme coins, and what could be next. Now, obviously, this is a little out of character for the show. We almost never touch these topics. But since we do in this episode, I will make the note that this is in no way financial advice. Nothing we say here should influence any personal choices you make about investing. Obviously. Now, before we kick off, I do want to just let you know about the ZK Summit. ZK Summit 13 is coming up. It's happening on May 12th in Toronto. This is the second time we bring the ZK Summit to North America, the first being all the way back in 2019 when we did one in San Francisco. If you've never been to a ZK Summit, I definitely recommend checking it out. This is the spot to find out about the latest research, the newest applications, to find out who are the most important players in ZK today. It's also a wonderful way to get to know sort of the larger ZK community. The application to attend is now open. If you'd like to apply to speak, you can do so in the same form. The speaker application deadline is March 15th. Generally, I recommend applying early. We do expect this event to sell out, and tickets are limited. Speaker slots are even more limited. So do get your application in early, and we'll get in touch with you very shortly. Links, as always, are in the show notes, and I hope to see you there. Now, here is our episode with Mert. So today, Tarun and I are here with Mert Mumtaz, co-founder and CEO at Helius. He's also a Solana researcher and a fellow podcaster. Welcome to the show, Mert.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Hey, Tarun. How you doing?
Good. I feel like I'm outnumbered by Canadians for once.
True. Canadians who don't live in Canada anymore.
Yeah, Canadians who don't live in Canada, right?
Nice. So I've been wanting to do a survey about the ZK projects in the Solana ecosystem for a while now. I feel like most of the ZK action we cover on the show tends to be either in like academic ZK research, it's on L1s dedicated to ZK, or I would say like a large part of the ZK research out there has been in the Ethereum ecosystem with rollups, ZK apps, ID, games, all of this stuff. But recently, I started to hear more and more projects sort of popping up from like in Solana that are at least touching ZK. And I'm kind of excited about that. Like I've been wanting to explore some sort of like ZK X Solana for a while. So yeah, this is why I wanted to have you on. And hopefully you can help us get a little insight into what's going on over there.
Yeah, I'll do my best. Not an expert, but we do work on a lot of the teams that support it. So yeah, let's see what I got.
Cool. Before we do that, though, let's get to know you a bit. Tell us a bit about yourself. And I know you're one of the people who went through kind of the Solana crash of 2022. So I'd love to hear a little bit about what kind of where you got your start and maybe what it was like to go through something like that.
Sure. Before that incident, I was at Coinbase, and I believe I was one of the first two Canadian folks actually hired by Coinbase. So they had just set up their office. And there I worked on a lot of stuff, but mostly they have an internal system called Ledger, which keeps track of all balance changes across all chains and transaction histories and all this. And so I actually worked a lot on Ethereum, Polygon, some early optimism stuff, and then even Avalanche. Solana was basically what I worked on my own time because I was curious. I was even curious about Polkadot and a bunch of different weird things, even briefly looking at Algorand. So I was already building on all of these chains on my own time, just basically trying to see what is possible with this tech. Like I had been in crypto from a, let's say, investor point of view for a little bit, but not necessarily hands-on engineering wise. As I was doing that, I built a lot of stuff on Solana, and those generally tend to get the most traction. These are all basic stuff. Like Solana didn't really have any block explorers back in the day and absolutely zero data analytics sites. So I would write my own indexers and then try to see if people were lying that were just posting on Twitter during the NFT season. They would say something like, oh, this mint is going super fast. And then I would write a script and be like, well, actually, you have 99% of the supply. And so it was very sketchy stuff. And while doing that, one, I noticed that the developers on Solana were super friendly, and I just found more of a community there than anywhere else personally. The second point is that I noticed how difficult it was to build on Solana. So, there was no concept of, there is a concept of an ABI, which is on EVM, but on Solana, that wasn't standardized. And also people were pretty cutthroat. And what that meant was to understand what the data looked like, you'd have to reverse engineer it by very obscure means, like literally reverse engineering bytecode and brute forcing it, or clicking somebody's like bundled JavaScript code in the front end, unbundling it, seeing how they set the types up and all this. And I figured, probably if I have this problem, everybody's going to have this problem. And so quit Coinbase, started Helios, raised around, and then a few months after, FTX happened.
Oh, whoa. So this is 2022. Now from that, I can kind of date when you're playing with it. Is it like leading up to this? So 2022, you're building these block explorers and like hanging out in there. And then I guess a few months after you create the company, boom.
Yep.
Okay. I love that idea though, that you're like reverse engineering, like blockchains at that moment. It's super frustrating, I think, for like the average dev, but I bet it's a lot of fun too. Because like by doing something like that, you're getting to know the logic underlying, like you're kind of getting to know the logic that the client developers are thinking about and that they're kind of putting into it, I guess.
Yeah. It was, it's fun to like post about your findings because nobody else has that information. So there's that inherent joy, let's say. But then once you actually do it and then the client dev just updates their contract or something, or their logic, which happens all the time, your code is just totally broken. And so you have to, it's like a war. You have to keep updating your own parsers faster than they can update their own code, which obviously is a losing game for me. But Solana's gotten much better at that over the years.
When did you actually first join? Like when you were at Coinbase? What era is that?
Like $8, Solana $8.
What year is that?
Everything is measured in price, not time. We're measuring, price is the real measurement of time.
Wow.
Actually, that's a bad answer because Solana's been $8 twice now. Okay, so if people remember the Degen Apes Mint, before which Solana was at a very low price, like below $8. And then this mint happened, and then all of the NFT seasons started happening. That was around the time.
Okay.
So that's 2021 or January or something?
Okay.
It's 2021 summer.
Summer, okay.
I see. I wonder, did you see Solana early on? Because I remember when it was first around 2019, I think, I remember like Near and Solana and Mina, like there was a group of teams that were all sort of more Silicon Valley. They were coming, like just the engineers, the types of founders, kind of who the investors were. There was like this generation. And Solana was part of that. I wouldn't have been able to say back then, this is going to be the one of that bunch that really like comes out flying. Do you think there was something unique at that early stage, though, that set it on the path? Or do you think there was sort of some like fortuitous accidents that led it to get to where it got?
I wasn't there, at least in an involved capacity, during the very early days. So like before it was even called Solana. But I guess I went through something similar when I was researching the different chains I want to build on. And so I looked at, Avalanche was pretty big at the time.
Yeah. I'd put that in that category too.
Near was kind of there, but they weren't as loud. So me and my co-founders at Helios, we all did the same program in university. It's called Apple Math. It's a double in applied math and communications and signals engineering. And so it's interesting because the way that Solana is structured is kind of like a giant radio. And so that just made the most sense. Like it just felt like the least amount of leaps that I had to make mentally to understand. And I just knew it would somewhat scale. I didn't know, like there's been a bunch of new introductions since then. But I figured like, okay, for Ethereum to scale, which I understood relatively well at that time, you need a bunch of conditionals in the future to evaluate to true. And they're obviously conditional on the other one. So like, the merge had to happen, 4844 had to happen, dank sharding has to happen, rollups have to be interoperable, all this stuff. And while I think that will happen, the simpler and easier bet for me at the time was like, well, Solana scales. It's broken in many ways due to how the code is written, but that's a very generic problem, right? You need to make the code more efficient and introduce some other things that we can talk about later. But it just seemed like a less risky bet and a more interesting scaling path.
Let's talk about the crash time. So you just started Helios a few months before that, then the price drops. Did you ever have a moment where you were like, okay, I guess that's it?
No, it was the total opposite for me. And that's why I was so confused all the time on Twitter, because I was already reply guying pretty aggressively by this point. But
I was going to say we probably should talk about the history of how you became the reply guy of that era.
Sure, yeah. So I was studying Solana on my own time, but I also understood how the ETH kind of EVM chains worked at a high level, and I was doing work with my own hands on both of them at Coinbase, but also on my own time. But then I would always see, I don't know when I started seeing this, but actually I used to reply guys Solana guys first, because they would try to like say dumb shit around, the NFT supplies like I mentioned. And I would be like, no, that's incorrect. And so it started me reply guying influencers on Solana. And then at some point I noticed some people that weren't even really on Ethereum, but they were just weird fund manager types. I think like Justin Bonds is one that came up quite frequently back in that time. And he would say something like, Solana has a fraudulent design because the leader schedule ahead of time, and so it's not random. And I'd be like, that is actually how a very large number of blockchains work. This is not specific to Solana. ETH 2.0 even is like pseudo-random. It's not even like purely random. I'm not even aware of anything that's purely random other than Algorand, which has the name Rand in it. And so anyways, I would just find all these posts and reply guy them pretty aggressively. And then people just start tagging me in them before I was even aware of them. And so at that point, once I see it, I'm like, oh shit, and I have to reply. I know better these days, but like back in that time, I didn't. And then one particular criticism was always around FTX and Alameda and these predatory tokenomics and whatnot at the time, which brings me to this, which is when I heard that FTX was going under, I was like, oh, sweet. Like now the predators are out. Now we can actually get to work and we don't have this big piece of FUD. But I think my time horizon for thinking that was just too different to everybody else. Because everybody else just figured, no, you're dead. Like that was the only reason you're alive, which I didn't agree with. And like people also weren't too close to the metal of what FTX was doing back then. The last thing they released on Solana was an NFT marketplace that totally tanked and was just a total failure. And they were also investing in like the move chains, like Sweet and Aptos. Yeah. They invested in Polygon and a whole bunch of other chains. And so it didn't seem like they were actually that useful for a very long time, at least by the time I joined in, mid 2021. And so I was happy. We also obviously run a company and our numbers were not affected at all.
Okay.
We were still getting a steady stream of developers using the product and good growth week over week, month over month. And so I was just very confused. And at that point, the amount of FUD on Twitter got to such a level where it became basically my second job to just reply to people and be like, this is incorrect. you are extremely incorrect, or some combination of those.
Second job or first job? Arguably, there was there were times it could have been the first job.
And people ask me this all the time, like, what is the split between Twitter and being the CEO? And it's like, I see it as kind of the same thing. Like, I don't consciously schedule like, okay, I'm going to do calls or I'm going to do podcasts or flights and conferences. It just all goes along with the same job. Because if the ecosystem is dead because nobody's actually refuting these points, then you're not going to have a company to begin with in that ecosystem.
At that time, everyone, I mean, so the FUD was crazy. The price dropped. What I remember is that like all the prices dropped. Everything was affected. But Solana dropped a lot. It was kind of, I mean, I think at the time, did it get down to 8 actually in that little block? Down from something like 200 almost, or 150.
Like 260.
Yeah, wild.
Yeah.
Like I'm guessing there was sort of the diehard crew that stayed, that continued building. You were talking about like you still had the same number of customers. Who were those people at that time? Like, how would you describe that group?
Backpack is one. So with Armani and Tristan at the time, they had just released a new crypto wallet, Backpack, and then this NFT project, Mad Lads, for example. That was one. I mean, Jupiter was still around. All the dexes, like, well, not all of them, but Orca, Radium were around. Camino was around. Jito was around. I mean, actually, not many people left. I think some people tried or experimented because I think Aptos launched kind of right after this. But like that didn't work for them. And so they came back from Aptos. There was also a lot of drama with NFTs and them getting grants to go to Polygon. And at the time, I had looked into this for a little bit and I was like, wait a minute, these guys are just getting paid to go on this. And so I called that out. And that got me into a whole lot of trouble for a very long time. And then I became actually very good friends with the Polygon guys. But so like, there was a lot of those shenanigans going on, but really, like, with the exception of DGods, which was just an NFT project, nobody really left. They all kind of just had worse revenues and activity, but I didn't see many people leave.
The main builders stayed. Tarun, did you work on Solana stuff at that time?
Mainly, the main thing I had done at that point was kind of, I invested in Jito in 2022. And so I'd spent a lot of time just like reading the scheduler code and on trying to understand the MEV stuff, because one thing I think the thing that convinced me there was something I misassessed Solana over time was trying to really understand the scheduler and the MEV usage and how kind of like it has a very different mechanism for priority auctions and priority fees. And it was sort of a sign that people were really using the chain enough that you had to come up with some of these things. Whereas like, you know, you look at Cosmos chains, or you look at Polkadot or things like that, you could tell there was like no real usage because no one had to build any of these priority scheduling things. There was like not really like this type of like, hey, we have to optimize our MEV auction for our chain because we just didn't have any users to do that.
There were a couple MEV projects I know on Cosmos, but they never really took off. There wasn't enough MEV.
Or they pivoted. Yeah,
true.
Exactly. But my point is like, there's sort of, I'm trying to remember the name of this like kind of apocryphal law. It's basically a thing that says like the structure of your code base reflects the structure of your organization. Like if your code base is very hierarchical, it means that you have a very hierarchical organization. If your code base is very random, it's like, oh, you've just had like people come and go quickly. And there's a sense in which, like, when you look at how people think about the transaction supply chain from like end users all the way to the chain, that tells you something about how much people actually are using the chain more than the actual code itself. Like if they've had to modify these types of things, it's because like they've had kind of crazy demand and usage. So I think at that time I was just trying to understand this MEV related stuff because like, yeah, the auction model in Solana is very different. There's not like this one big auction like there is in Ethereum. There's kind of many small ones that get aggregated. And I think in general, the kind of high throughput nature of Solana just like it makes it look very different. And yeah, I think like it's good to have had like to have both kind of the like horizontal scaling versus vertical scaling blockchains. Because like in some sense, I think there's probably not going to be like a winner takes all that wins in one of those. But that maybe Mert will disagree with me on that. But
No, that sounds right. One of the big misconceptions that I saw quite a bit on Twitter was like a lot of hate towards Solana because Solana claims that it can do all the traffic on the universe or something around crypto. But that's actually not the case. And that's not the goal. The goal is just, we think it's cool to have a giant state machine that can sync information as fast as possible around the world. That's it. Now, that'll benefit some use cases, and it will be totally senseless for other use cases. So it's really about what are the business requirements here? Why do you actually need a chain?
And actually just bringing, so we're still in late 2022, early 2023, but like it's evolved a lot since then. Has the tech changed? Do you feel like you're dealing with a different beast under the hood now? I mean, obviously tons of tooling. I think you've built some of it. So yeah, like tell us a little bit about that evolution.
Yeah, well, people probably remember all the outages in 2022.
Oh yeah.
And there wasn't many in 2023. It's actually due to what Tarun was saying. There was a lot of demand. So like there would be an NFT mint and people, and I mean, these people were insane. They would get data center grade equipment and just spam the living shit out of the nodes, like 100 gigabytes per second bandwidth times few multiples of that constantly. And so the amount of traffic that these nodes were handling was pretty insane. And so we knew that that wasn't going to work. Like Tolly and team basically did not expect how degenerate people would be when it came to actually using blockchains. They thought these people, must be somewhat reasonable, and they'll just do order book stuff. But then he's like, why are people just aping this much into like JPEGs? And so there was that kind of whole series of outages, and there was a few big changes that came from that most people just, I guess, weren't aware of. But like one was the introduction of like changing the networking protocol, like going from just raw UDP to Quick, and like Google's thing, adding stake weighted QoS, quality of service based on stake bandwidth, or getting bandwidth in proportion to stake, localized fee markets, right? Well, people don't actually know this, but Solana has said they have fee markets, but they haven't actually had fee markets in production until like maybe not even last year. So they're actually quite new. And a bunch of other changes like that. Some of them quite boring, but very much dynamic. So for example, just this past upgrade, 2.1, which is the latest client upgrade, they made a few changes to the client such that, because, we say the block times are 400 milliseconds, but in practice, they can be like 450, 500 milliseconds even. And now they upgraded or fixed so many bugs in the core client that now the average block time is like 390 milliseconds. So it actually went down. And that just goes to show you like how much it contrasts to Ethereum, where they did not plan that to happen. They just wrote the code, fixed it, and then the block time just went down, which sounds good, maybe not so good, who knows. But there's a lot of upgrades like that. And then going forward, there's a much more structured process because now there's a second client with FireDancer and a much more structured roadmap versus the early days. You can maybe think of it as like a startup just not trying to die.
Yeah.
So actually, I'm a kind of question that has come up and caused fights in Ethereum, but I've actually been kind of curious about how it is kind of viewed in Solana is, the multi-client roadmap in Ethereum has been controversial for a bunch of reasons. One, you have 5 clients. If you have a bug in one, then like, how do you replicate the bug in the others, right? Like they're very different code bases, different languages. You might not be able to perfectly replicate or be bitwise compatible. And we've seen a couple bugs live in Ethereum where that has been true. Where like,
isn't it supposed to be that if there's a bug in one, it's saved by the fact that there is no bug in the other? That's always the story they tell.
That's one side of the argument, but the developer side of the argument is I have to maintain multiple clients, right?
Yeah. So would you try to introduce the bug if it's not a breaking bug just to keep it going?
Well, I'm more just saying like, hey, like maintaining 5 copies of something that's supposed to be equal to 1 has a cost, and the development cost of like I add a new feature to a fork, and now all the clients have to agree. There's some overhead, right? So like, for instance, in the FireDancer and Anza Agave type of thing. If I make a fork, I need to make sure the forks agree beforehand. And sure, I could go run them live and run into the edge case, but that's not an ideal scenario so like, given that you are running infrastructure provider, you're running RPCs and making sure people can submit, how do you feel about this kind of like multi-client thing? Like 2 is, not 10, but like, yeah, what are your thoughts on the multi-client versus single client trade-off?
Yeah, I mean, just from a purely selfish point of view, we don't like it because it's a lot of extra work for us. And it even happens today, like with the order flow games, because the protocol isn't necessarily defined very well at the boundaries. And so there's like 6 different ways to send transactions today where the RPC somehow has to figure this out now. The reason why FireDancer was extremely important, especially at the time when it was announced, is because of the reasons I said, which is the software kind of just sucks on the core client. Like it's just an unsalvageable code base. It's totally broken in many ways. And the protocol has no spec. Like a lot of missing basic things that are extremely difficult to do a refactor of, but are probably doable when you do a rewrite in something as a fresh rewrite. And so that's why FireDancer was exciting, because now with a pure rewrite and now good interface boundaries and specs and all this, that's definitely a net better situation than the existing stuff. But I'm not sure what happened here, but Anza hired a lot of very smart people to the point where those guys actually, it seems like they've actually been able to salvage the code base. And it seems like they probably will be able to make it much better going forward. And so now you have this case where you have 2 clients who are probably pretty equal, I would say, especially because FireDancer hasn't been live yet. And so I'm going to give the points to Anza in that case. And so now you have a much different scenario than Ethereum, where Ethereum is a bit more like, equality of outcome in a sense. Like I'm not going to get political, but like it has to be that way for the system to work. Whereas on Solana, it's like they're kind of just competing against each other as hard as they can. And whoever gets the most validators to adopt it is kind of the winner. And that also depends on like how well are they serving their customers who are the validators, right? Like, are you maximizing the revenue? Are you actually making transaction inclusion much better, less fragmented, all these different things? And so I don't know how it plays out. We certainly don't like, or I don't know many people on Solana who actually like the concept of multiple clients past maybe 2. And the only reason 2 is like useful is because like a day 0 or something in one of the clients, and then now you're totally fucked and you have to use a different client or something. But as an RPC provider, not a fan, and I'll let them battle it out.
Yeah, I mean, I only ask this because like in Ethereum, I actually think the interesting thing is that the production clients and the testing clients are completely different. Like a lot of people like developing with REST, but they don't. They use, no one who's running execution nodes is using it. And so I feel like there's sort of this problem of like too many clients equals too much maintenance. Obviously, yeah, from your perspective, I totally get it. More than 2 sounds like a nightmare, right? But there's sort of this weird thing. I've never really understood why you need so many clients. I'm more of the mindset that like you're more likely to have developers introduce bugs by accident when they have to rewrite the same thing 5 times in 5 different places than otherwise. But
interesting. I actually hadn't thought of that. What you just shared, Mert, that observation of like the multi-client and roughly evenly used multi-client, like that's seemingly a bit of the goal. You don't want one to win in Ethereum. And you're kind of saying, actually, in Solana, it would be fine if one won.
Yeah, I mean, like, and there's some architectural decisions or protocol decisions that affect this, I think. Like Ethereum has the concept of an activity leak, for example, that might play nicely with multiple clients, whereas on Solana, yeah, I mean, we don't like outages. Nobody does. They're unacceptable. But like if there is one, like how much do we care about safety over liveness, or what's that trade-off look like? And obviously everybody has different opinions on this, but if there's one client live and then you're doing it such that you have a backup running with the other validator, so like Helios, we're the biggest validator, assume you run Anza, and then we have in the background in like a blue-green deployment, FireDancer running, then let's say the chain goes down from the Anza bug, we can switch over. Now, it might not be instant. It might take 30 minutes or something, but that still just did the job.
I thought I heard, and this is because I'm not that deep in this ecosystem, but when like the Trump token launch wasn't there some sort of like outage or problem or something didn't quite happen? Like maybe it was only on the wallet level, but can you share a little bit of what happened there?
Sure. So interestingly, the Trump coin itself was handled very well by everybody. What the problem was, within 2 days, Melania launched a coin. And when Melania launched a coin, the following happened. This is kind of hard to follow, but roughly speaking, there's two paths for transactions on Solana. One is the regular Solana client. One is Jito, right? So Jito and Solana, let's say. Jito is more used for, obviously MEV folks, but like arbitrage traders and all this. And what happened was Jito became degraded. And when Jito becomes degraded, those arbitrage folks now can't use Jito, and now they must use the actual main scheduler of the chain, which means now there's much more competition and congestion on the main chain, which means, among other things, the fees go up. But also, since the scheduler itself is so inefficient, it inherently makes the chain less performant, like you process less transactions. But also, some very bespoke things here, like, Jupiter, for example, hard caps their fees on the front end, such that as a user, assume now the fees on Solana have risen from 0.001 to $1. Jupiter will not set the fees to $1. They just won't do it. There's a hard cap for safety purposes. But if you do that, then your users are literally locking themselves out because they're not paying the fees. They can't. And that actually tends to be the case with all apps on Solana, including Phantom. And so you have this situation where everybody is bidding below market for getting included, except the arbitrage traders who are bots.
Are they blocking them out? Are they like taking that away from the chance that like the users can't actually get anything through? Was that what had actually happened? That like people were just trying to get a transaction and it just wasn't happening?
Yes, but the reason is, one is obviously Jito went down, which caused the fees to be higher and caused more contention on the main validators. But the second, and I confirmed this myself, is the apps themselves, not intentionally, of course, but accidentally lock the users out from competing. Because if it costs $5 to be included, but you don't let your users pay over 5 cents, no user's going to get in. It does. And so what I did was I went on Jupiter, manually changed my own fees, and then bid above the market. And I would always get included myself. But like, you're not going to tell all, thousands of users, hey, you have to set the fees manually now. That's just not going to work.
Especially not all the new users that had just joined for the first time.
Yeah. So that's what happened. But like, there was no halt to block production or anything.
Okay.
You could, I think, probably make an interesting argument like, hey, does Jito being degraded mean Solana is down because it is a Jito client? But I don't think that would compute if you took it to its eventuality.
Is there actually like a postmortem on Jito though? Like, is there going to be a community effort to fix that? Or does it seem like such an unusual spike and they don't expect it like anytime soon, so it's okay to leave it as is?
No. I mean, those guys ship. I mean, they haven't disclosed everything, but they have many upgrades coming.
Got it. All right. I want to dive in now to some ZK stuff. I feel like talking through the history of your involvement in Solana, but also just Solana's development, this has been really helpful. Also to share a little bit of the distinction between Solana and some of the ecosystems that we're used to exploring ZK in. Let's do this survey that I wanted to do, which is like, what is out there in ZK? And maybe let's start with like, what was first? Where did you first see like ZK being used? At what level? Is it like in the kind of roll up? I know it's not a roll up in Solana, but is it like roll up like? Is it for compression, let's say? Or is it for something else, like privacy?
Yeah, I think the first, and I could be wrong, I'm sure there's like some other thing that I haven't heard of, but if I'm to just maybe put on my mainstream hat, probably the first two were Elusive and Light Protocol, and those were both doing privacy at the time.
Okay.
So private payments, private dexes, things of this nature. And there was even like an NFT project that was relatively popular at that time. I think it was called like Dark Protocol or something along those lines. And they had, some small ecosystem of tools like ZK confidential transfers and stuff like this. And so those were kind of the big ones. And then they basically all pivoted because I don't think they found product market fit with privacy. And so Elusive rebranded to something called Archeum. And now they do what's called like verifiable compute, where it's kind of like a different network, but it still uses Solana for some elements. And then Light, they pivoted to basically ZK scaling, but this looks very different than other chains because Solana's scaling needs are very different. So to give you a rough idea, on EVM chains, generally speaking, not always, compute is relatively expensive, but storage is cheap. And on Solana, it's the total opposite, where compute is extremely cheap, but storage is very expensive. And so, for example, if I send you right now an NFT or USDC, what I need to do is I need to pay to open your storage account for that asset. So not only do I pay a transaction fee for doing compute, I also have to pay a fee to open up your storage. And you can imagine that, let's say you're doing an airdrop, I now have to do this to 10,000 different accounts. And so that's 10,000 storage fees and then 10,000 compute fees. And so we had this thing called NFC compression. This is before Light, where basically what we would do is we would not store the data in these storage accounts. So the data would not be stored in accounts. It would be stored as, let's say, call data on transactions. So instead of opening 10,000 different accounts and airdropping to 10,000 different people, what you would do is you would do 10,000 different transactions. And then the details of that transaction were in the form of Merkle leaves. And so then what you would need is an infrastructure provider like Helios to replay that state and then expose the latest state to people.
Okay. I like the distinction you're making, though, the compute being cheap on Solana and expensive on Ethereum. I mean, I'm obviously way more used to the Ethereum model, so, but I don't know if I would have known that you'd consider compute more expensive on Ethereum and storage being cheap. I mean, I feel like what you've described here, it suggests that like rollups, how ZK rollups are working, are they making use of that cheap storage on sort of the L1? And so if you try to replicate that, you'd have to kind of think about it differently if you're doing it on Solana?
Well, so if I'm to maybe extend the thought from before with the compression stuff, so now what happened is the compression stuff that I just mentioned, and this didn't include ZK, only worked for NFTs. It was specific to NFT accounts.
Okay.
Right? Because on Ethereum, your data and your logic is in the same contract, is in the same place. On Solana, that's not the case. You have explicitly separated out accounts for data and logic, right? So it's decoupled in that way. And so then the question is like, okay, if this works for NFTs, can it not work for all types of accounts on Solana? So generalizing compression to the entire chain such that we scale storage for the chain, right? We're not scaling compute. We're not bottlenecked by TPS. We're bottlenecked by rent, which is the fee that you pay to open an account. And so with ZK compression, it is any account on Solana, you can compress it and then link it back with a Merkle hash or a Merkle root. And so you can guarantee the integrity of that data on the ledger. But so this is kind of funny.
So it's not a roll up then, because like for some reason I thought it was like a Solana equivalent to a roll up, different but similar in that it's like batching a lot of different state. But here you're saying like it's a single account being compressed.
Or many accounts. But yeah, it is not a roll up. And this is where it gets really interesting or funny. You know, at the time we're like, okay, what should we call this? And the ZK is not used in many places here. ZK is used only for the proof and making it constant size. Like you can actually get away without using ZK. So it's kind of like a nice to have, but it's not strictly necessary. But we call it ZK compression because we use compression and then we use ZK on top of the compression. So we released this product. By the way, Helios did not build this. We only built the indexers. Light Protocol built the actual protocol.
Okay.
But so I tweeted it, and my goodness, everybody on Ethereum was like, "Oh my God, they're just calling it's a roll up, it's a Validium, it's an Optim, it's all this stuff," and we're like, "No, it's not any of those," and nobody would believe me. And so what I had to do was I was on Farcaster. I was like, I need to get a hold of Vitalik somehow, and so I described how it works. to Vitalik. Because by the way, we always call this, the technical term for this is a stateless accumulator, right? This is not a new concept. This already exists in computer science. It's a stateless accumulator. But on Ethereum, people kind of conflated with the rollup. And so I'm like, Vitalik, what would you call this? And he said, yeah, this does not seem like a rollup. It seems much more like Ethereum's like, vertical tries and like stateless client architecture stuff. And I was like, yes, thank you. So there's a lot of confusion there, but it's not a rollup in the traditional sense of what you would call a rollup.
Got it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the controversy here was kind of funny because I feel like there are other things that people call network extensions in Solana that are much closer to rollups than this. and or are just basically rollups. I don't exactly get why everyone wants to fight about the nomenclature though, because it's like, don't you care about what it's used for rather than like what word I call it? And somehow I feel like this entire discussion made me feel like remind myself of that, because it's like, is the name that important? I think isn't it what it's used for more important? But that was just sort of my feeling when I was reading this, and I muted the word roll up for a few weeks, I feel like.
But you are saying there are kind of like equivalent to rollups already in a different form, but maybe not using ZK.
Yep. Yeah, there are rollups on Solana. I don't think any of them are live.
Okay.
There is, so maybe going along with the survey from the past question. So like Succinct is now on Solana. Risk Zero is on Solana. They have, Boundless, and they're doing some other work. There's Bonsol, which is by Anagram. That's another ZK framework. And then within Solana actually has no live rollups today, but one team that's working on it is Zeta Markets. Their new product is called Bullet, and it's a sovereign rollup using Sovereign Labs' framework. So that'll be like the first sovereign rollup on Solana. So the term network extensions, by the way, horrible name, makes no sense. And I tried telling this to the folks who came up with it long before it came out. And the reason is simple. A name is supposed to be specific such that the reader understands what's being referred to. But in this case, it's more used as a marketing term to mean we can come up with our own names as well. And so the easiest way to think about it is a network extension can include L2s, but it doesn't have to. It can be many other different things. It can be, for example, ZK compression, which is not a rollup, but it's a network extension.
Okay, that is also, I see. So it's like the meta category then.
Yes.
But it doesn't the whole idea of network extensions kind of go against what Solana built itself as in the first place? Like going back to that story of like how Ethereum, the full extent of Ethereum is the merge, the EIPs, the rollups that talk to each other, and having those extensions off the L1, it's built because of the way the L1 works. But Solana, I feel like, was always built as like, you don't need rollups because it's so performant as an L1. So like, why have rollups? Like, what's the point there? Or sorry, network extensions or any of these things?
Yeah, so the difference here, and Tolly will make this distinction all the time, is that what we care about is having the execution on chain, right? With a traditional rollup on EVM, for example, there's not enough compute that you can do on the L1, so you must do the execution off chain. And off chain means a rollup, and then you roll it back up to the L1, right? So execution is not on the L1, but we think that execution is the most interesting part of Solana, or let's say blockchains. And so as long as execution remains on the L1, which in the case of like ZK compression, for example, all the transactions are still on the L1. So the execution is still there, but the latest state exposed might not be on the L1. But that doesn't matter because Solana's thesis is like the value is in execution, right? MEV, priority fees, auctions, all this requires execution. And that's what we want on the L1. Now, that being said, there's another like slippery line of thinking that I've seen recently, which is like, okay, well, Solana is getting some network extensions. Does that mean it's becoming like Ethereum? And I would actually say it's becoming more like Bitcoin, where the core difference here is that the L1 does not adjust itself to cater to rollups, right? Like on Bitcoin, you can build a rollup, and Bitcoin people don't care. Yeah. You can fork, and put a dog coin on it or something. Bitcoin people don't care. They just have that one thing they want to do. Solana is the same, which is they just want to, reduce latency, increase bandwidth. meaning keep execution on chain. Now, if somebody wants to come and say, hey, I'm going to actually also build a rollup on top of this, they can do that because it's a permissionless network. But like, you're not going to get the core devs to be like, okay, like, let me now give you some extra blob space or something. That's kind of the core difference.
What about then ZK VMs though? Because in the case of ZK VMs, at least again, the way I've understood it, a lot of it is about like you're submitting proofs, but a lot of the execution is actually happening wherever, but often not on the L1. Is that different when you look at like Succinct or RISC-0, like connecting to the Solana ecosystem, or are they still using Solana in the same way?
Again, it's a permissionless network. And so if people think there's like some weird market gap where people need much more compute than Solana, and they think they don't want to do it on Solana and they want to do it on a rollup, then yeah, I mean, it's a free market. You can build this product, see if you get traction, all this. The core difference is, again, the core devs are not going to care. They're just going to, like, they're not going to write new opcodes or something just so that you accompany rollups. Like, for example, the big difference between Ethereum is that if you look at the roadmap, it's designed to become a hub for rollups.
Yeah.
Right. Solana would not do that. They just care about the one thing, which is IBRL. And now, if the block space is valuable enough such that you want to extend it and build a rollup on top of it, by all means, go ahead. And you know, like for some cases, it might be better for that, like a base rollup, right, with much shorter block times. That might be better. But the core thing is that like Jito, Helios, FireDancer, Anza, we're not going to build rollups. Like the core devs just won't do that.
I don't know if you followed any of the ZK development in Ethereum, but there was also like the coprocessor idea. This idea of doing, or like, sometimes it'll be like an AI environment that lives off chain and then uses ZK to come back. But does that actually matter in something like Solana? Because like, yes, it's amazingly performant, but I'm guessing it's still like blockchain performant. Is it able to do really big things, really big computation loads? Is it able to do like something that would be, you'd have to have like in the real world, like tons of machines running it? Like, can it do it?
No. I mean, obviously, it would depend on what we're referring to, but I would say performant in the context of blockchains, not performant in the context of compute in general.
Yeah.
It always comes back. So with Solana, it's very simple because there's really just one vision, which is decentralized NASDAQ, right? Can you sync prices across the world with minimal latency, right? That's it. Now, if you want to do other things on top of this, then you can. So with RISC-0, you can do this. Actually, Solana has the concept of ephemeral rollups, where state is extended ephemerally and then brought back right after And so there's like funky things like this.
Cool.
And like, I'm being a little repetitive, but the whole dichotomy is that people can do those things. And Solana, like, you can't, I'm not going to be able to ban anybody. Hey, like, you're breaking the law here. The only thing is we're not going to change core to accompany it.
Are you sure it'll never change? How come you're so sure?
For sure, it could change in the future. Like, I don't, it wouldn't, because otherwise it's just an ideology, and that's not engineering, right? And so engineering is just about, okay, what problems are we solving that actually exist and that we actually can solve better than others. So I don't foresee it changing in at least the next 5, 6, 7, 8 years, maybe. Because you can also see the current roadmap, which involves like async execution, multiple concurrent leaders, and other things along those lines. That being said, let's say some breakthrough happens that we don't see coming, and within 2 years, now you must have ZK on-chain, on-core to an enshrined concept or something. Then, we're still pragmatic. We won't just say, no, like we're, the gods told us not to do this, so we won't do it.
You're not Bitcoin Core.
Yeah.
Well, I another thing I will say is like, I actually think the coprocessor type of stuff makes more sense in some ways. And so I think that's why the ZK you see, at least from people taking the existing VMs and applying it to Solana, look more like coprocessors than it is like a rollup, in the sense that under really high latency constraints, if you want to do some sort of like long running calculation infrequently, you kind of don't really want to constantly be broadcasting that to a chain and dealing with kind of getting the transaction in. But you do maybe want to do that infrequently. And in theory, these Solana validators are already running beefy hardware. So like maybe they do something like restaking, like, or something where they like are participating in these off-chain co-processing networks alongside their validator and only infrequently have to post. So I think in Ethereum, the co-processor stuff never took off because there just wasn't enough demand for it. And people, once they went to rollup, they just kind of were like, okay, well, compute's so cheap, I don't care anymore. It was like sort of a very weird thing. So I think that's why we also saw, in the market, every single co-processor just pivoted to becoming a VM.
Totally.
Which was also just like a weird, like the idea of like, I had a product and I'm going to become less of a product, I'm going to become a virtual machine, is like a very funny thing to observe about a market, right? Because it started narrower and got broader. Usually in startups, it's like, I start broader and I get narrower.
Well, they moved to a different part of the stack almost. They were like, oh, okay, we haven't quite nailed it. Yeah. But actually, Lagrange moved a different way. They went proof of network from coprocessor, I think. That seems to be the two directions.
I forgot one thing about ZK on Solana, which is that, because I was talking about how core devs want to accompany it. That's not technically correct in the full sense, because Solana has these new things called token extensions. It's pluggable programs into Solana. And one of them is a confidential transfer. So within Solana core, you can actually do confidential transfers. And those confidential transfers use ZK. So it's built into the core protocol that you can confidentially transact.
I was also reading about something, maybe this is what you're talking about, but it was called like syscalls, and that there were some like ZK related ones. Is that what you're describing, or is that something else?
It's related.
Okay.
Yeah. That goes like pretty in the weeds, but that's not like in the context of scaling. It's to enable other things like confidential transfers.
But this is inside the protocol itself. So this is where we're like, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
That's cool. Can you explain what those are? For our audience, like I think they'll probably follow.
Assuming the audience is like EVM focused, a good way to explain it would be on EVM, you generally need to deploy a new contract for a new token, right? And then you need to write different things for that token, and it needs to follow the ERC20 interface. On Solana, this is not the case. On Solana, you have enshrined programs, so like the token program, and then you just say token program, create new token. Here's the ticker. So that's like very simple, very different. And so one of those new features is that token program, create new token, and then transfer confidentially. So now every token with a token extension on Solana can be transferred confidentially. So you can see who received it and who sent it, but you can't see the amount.
That's so cool. That's like partial privacy all of a sudden, but built into like when you're, this is like, is it a choice when you're actually developing the token? Like, will it be individual tokens have that quality? Or is it like certain accounts will have that quality?
Yeah, you can add this to any individual token.
Oh, cool. Wow. Yeah, I haven't heard of something like that. And that's ZK?
Yep.
Nice. I feel like we've done kind of an interesting survey of like where ZK is being used in this stack. Some of it is applications on top. Some of it is actually within the client itself. But we started this talking a little bit more about like the MEV in Solana and like the fact that that was really active compared to other ecosystems. I know that in MEV land, Tarun, you're often telling me like TEEs are used for MEV stuff. There's reason to use other kinds of either privacy preserving or advanced cryptography. Do you know, Mert, if there's also stuff like that happening in the Solana world where, trusted execution environments are used in order to, I don't know, hide something to make sure that there's this place where execution can happen without anyone seeing it on chain?
I cannot comment on this.
Really?
I think perhaps in the future.
Okay. Is it because maybe there's something, but you don't have to say? Sounds like something might be in the works.
Once it's released, I'll flag it to you so you can
cool.
have
I'm in the same boat as Mert, actually.
Oh, like sworn to secrecy. That's amazing.
Let's just say people are in Solana are looking at everything. It's not like they're like, you know, hey, we hate cryptography or something.
I mean, there are these other, sort of advanced programmable crypto stuff like MPC and FHE. Both like FHE especially is still very fresh. So I don't know. Have you heard of anything like that being used in the Solana ecosystem? MPC, FHE. I mean, I think you did mention one thing.
Well, the hosted MPC wallets, like the turnkeys of the world, are certainly used in Solana, right? Like if I look at Moonshot's basically enabled by MPC like login. So I think, but that's not something that's unique to Solana, right? That's like all networks kind of have that.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a few MCP teams who use MCP, like
MPC.
No. But the reason he's saying MCP is that's multiple concurrent proposer, which is like something that's getting implemented in Solana.
Right. It's actually embarrassing because I worked on MPC at Coinbase, one of the Coinbase wallet products. But yeah, on Solana, there's a few teams. There's like squads, turnkey, different wallet abstraction folks. Backpack is adding it for their exchange products, which is on SVM. Cube, I think, actually is also like a hybrid L1 DEX SEX that uses MPC pretty strongly as well. So a lot of usage for MPC specifically. For FHE, I'm not sure. I think Kyle is pretty interested in that, like multi-coin, but I'm not sure if I've seen anything.
I'm actually going to link to a blog post from Helios, which is focused on ZK applications. In there, you did mention that Archeum, which was previously elusive, was using something called multi-party computation execution environments, which sounds like a combination of MPCT, but maybe ZK too. But yeah, do you think, is that related? Actually, do you know?
I think they basically rebranded that to verifiable compute. So I don't know exactly what they're going to do. Like their go-to-market isn't, I haven't kept up with it, but that would be a team that strongly uses ZK and other cryptography on Solana.
I have a more practical question, which is, we've talked about a lot of these applications, but I'm kind of curious, what is the developer, since you see developers who are building kind of, using you to submit transactions and test and stuff like that, like what are the kind of features of the vein that use advanced cryptography that you see demand for? Like, are there a lot of people trying to do private tokens, like private transactions, or is it more focused on compression and saving gas, like, and doing kind of these like token launches becoming cheaper? Like, what is sort of like the demand on the developer side look like?
And that's today, because you did say that earlier there had been no product market fit for privacy, but yeah, curious if that's changed.
Yeah, I would say there's probably still no real PMF for privacy on Solana, at least, although I invest in privacy stuff pretty frequently. The majority is based around compression, which is just scaling large-scale bulk token operations or account operations. And then, we've worked with, obviously, Light. And like there's syscalls in the protocol itself. So like the developer experience is not too bad, just directly working with Core. And then Sovereign Labs, that's been an interesting one, although I'm not sure if they use ZK for their stuff or if it's just for posting DA. I'll have to double check that. And then like there's some interest around, the scaling stuff that I've seen, but generally we don't work too closely with those folks because or at least I should say that wouldn't technically be Solana. This might be for their own L2 or something, which is an SVM rollup, but that doesn't sell on Solana. But I haven't seen many selling on Solana.
Cool. Well, thanks for that survey. That was actually really helpful. ZK in Solana does seem a little bit at an earlier stage. Like it sounds like there's like little inroads, but you just kind of mentioned maybe it's not being used that much yet. Like, I don't know if the utility is completely found within the ecosystem yet. Yeah,
I would just say that the teams who actually work on those, like Light, would probably put me to shame on that. Like they focus quite a bit on it.
All right.
But from, our customers are regular app developers mostly, or quants and traders and stuff. So it is entirely possible that we just don't come across those types of users. And so Light would have a better idea.
Okay.
But that being said, Phantom, I believe, is adding ZK compression tokens today.
Cool.
So that goes to show you, like, it does have adoption, and like certain projects are already using it for their tokens as well.
Nice. Now I just have a question, just generally. I'm just curious, and really it might be the corner of X that I'm paying attention to, but like meme coins and Solana, like it's a narrative that has like moved together, and I just wonder, like at this moment, snapshot. What's your feeling about it? Is it forever? Do you want it to be forever? Is it dead?
Is love
dying?
Forever? This is like asking the same kind of philosophical question.
I get asked this actually relatively frequently, so my answer is pretty generic at this point. And so, okay, basically, if you look at the history of crypto, the thing that has the most PMF is generally speculation. in different forms, right? So you have ICO, NFTs, meme coins, dog coins, L1 forks, all these different things.
Yes.
I would even put governance coins in some regard to that category.
Yeah.
And so 100%. It's almost always the same thing. And, we can debate for why that is. And I think it's probably due to poor regulation, but that is the case. Like that is the big thing. And so that's very general to all of crypto. It's not, so like when NFTs happened, for example, they were on OpenSea on ETH L1, and then they were on Magic Eden on Solana L1, and then they were on Bitcoin. And so they were everywhere. With meme coins, it's just the latest form of this. And it ended up being on Solana because, well, I think a few reasons. One is that I think creating tokens on Solana is, again, you don't have to write a contract. You just click the button. That's it. Yeah, it's easier. Phantom is already integrated, and you don't have the temporary problem, at least, of this fragmentation between the different systems of rollups. You just do it on Solana. And so you take all those, and then, there's Jupiter, there's all these TG bots, there's Pump.Fun, obviously. From Solana's point of view, it's like decentralized NASDAQ. And what that means is we want to enable the trading of assets at the fastest speeds possible, as affordably as possible in a decentralized system. Now, the names of those assets can be NFTs, or they can be USDC, or it can be meme coins. And today, it just happens to be the case that most of crypto is in the meme coin phase. And most of that happens on Solana.
Yeah.
But from our perspective as like core devs, let's say, we don't care. It's a really good stress test. Like, we wouldn't have been able to handle the meme coin craze that just happened were it not for NFT craze a few years ago that made us improve the core system to not go down again in cases like this, right? There are some promising things, like the stablecoin supply on Solana more than doubled since the Trump launch, for example. And then many more RWA started launching, like tokenized gold. Franklin Templeton just expanded to Solana today, for example. And by the way, like other ecosystem, like Avalanche had a meme coin fund. Base is obviously very involved in trying to get that going. I still view AI agents as meme coins.
I said this on a podcast the other day, which is if you're targeting anyone 25 and older, you can go to L2s. If you're targeting people 25 and under for meme coins, you have to go to Solana. There's like, it's a very age bifurcated universe. I hate to say it. I mean, that's why I think all the L2 meme coins are things that are only funny to millennials. It's sad, but it's true. It's like, it's just like,
oh yeah, the age gap is real. It's funny when you talk about it being the NASDAQ, I start to be like, so are the meme coins kind of like penny stocks? Like in the future, is that what they kind of become?
Sure.
Yeah. Although I don't know, are penny stocks on the NASDAQ actually? Are they like officially listed?
Well, there's like the OTC pink sheets, whatever stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder like if there will be, because that's another thing you just described, like how easy it is to launch a token. I feel like in the past, you could launch a token on Ethereum pretty easy. I mean, yes, you had to deploy a contract, but there were websites that made it like almost a button, but it wouldn't get listed. It was impossible to find.
Well, I think the most important thing about Pump.Fun style mechanisms versus like all the historical stuff is like, it took a bonding curve. So you put in some money and then you get some fraction of sort of the tokens. And then once enough people put in money into the bonding curve, it converts to an AMM and then it burns the token. So like there's no wallet owner of the LP pool. So that means that like the person who created the token can't just remove all the liquidity and like immediately rug you. Now there are other ways they can do that, but via sniping the pool and whatever. But like just at least at face value, it's actually a lot better because like there've been all these like social token things for years and whatever, and they all just use bonding curves. But the bonding curves would basically get manipulated, and there wasn't like a free market to trade it. So like the idea that the bonding curve converts to an AMM pool was like the main innovation in my mind. Although, of course, like if I'm running an MEV bot, as soon as it converts and I snipe all the tokens, and I've basically gotten rid of that. But it took people a while to, a few months before I think that kind of flipped from like the fair launch. Everything in crypto, to Mert's point, is like all of these things have something similar. They all start with this ethos of like fair launching, right? That like the supply will be distributed fairly. And within a couple months, the market figures out a way to make them not fair launches.
To game it.
Right?
Amazing.
Like that's
So true.
But that's like sort of the cat and mouse game of all tokens, I think.
Meme coins have been around for a long time. NFTs were around for a very long time before they became popular. What do you think exists today that could be the next generation kind of speculative asset or speculative object mechanism? I wonder if you'd spot it on Solana. Could be AI, maybe.
No, yeah. People used to tell me AI, and one of my hot predictions for 2025 was that AI will die or AI tokens will die. And it seems like that's actually already happened. So it took much. I know Tarun loves the DeSci stuff.
DeSci will be it. DeSci will be it.
True scams. Please do not.
Could be RWAs. They never really had their moment.
CZ is really shilling DeSci though, so like I feel like I'm probably going to get overrun by CZ.
Oh man,
unfortunately.
I think it'll be if it does happen, it'll probably be more social-fi oriented, because I think this has been tried many times and hasn't worked.
Yeah.
And so it's like probably somebody's learned from this mistake at some point in like how to do social-fi less incorrectly.
And when you say that, do you mean like the friend.tech kind of social-fi, or do you mean like launching a token into a social network? Because I also think that has never been successfully done. Like Telegram has tried a couple times and like it hasn't quite worked. But if like X was to do it, maybe that would work.
Well, something that could be successful that's already doing quite well is like Kaido with the yaps. Right. That's like social-fi in a sense. You talk socially and then you earn some points, and those points presumably give you some tokens or something, maybe. So like social intelligence and like financializing that somewhat. And I know of at least like 4 or 5 big social-fi apps coming to Solana. I think that Clout one just launched, and a bunch of other, there's like Time.fun. So I think those have a good shot, but I have no idea, honestly.
Okay. I have a question for you for a 2025 prediction, which is, how long do you think the .fun domain lasts? Does it still grow to the end of the year, or does it fizzle off the way .xyz kind of fizzled off?
That's a good question. I think something that will make it that will keep it alive is Solana Mobile launching, and I think they will try to like be like, oh, we're very mobile focused and stuff, and I think there'll be a new wave of those with the mobile stuff. And I think it lasts 2025. I don't think it lasts much longer than that, but it definitely lasts a year in my view.
I also don't think it's full mainstream yet. I think it has space. There's too many things that have not been .fund.
I mean, SocialFi does remind me of NFTs in one way. When I think about NFTs in 2017, like CryptoKitties, like they had this huge boom the way FriendTech did, and then it crashed
totally
the same way.
And
but
it
took
stayed dead for like 3 years.
More than that, right? It's 2021, really,
true,
right?
True.
Yeah, like 4 years. So
dead.
SocialFi, I kind of agree with you. It could have a rebirth, but
and people hate that shit, though.
Yeah,
but maybe we hated NFTs too at the beginning.
One thing that I think is super under the radar and has not really worked, but I think could, is like these sports tokens. Karate Combat.
There was that basketball one that like the CryptoKitty people had done. What was it? That was the initial NFT thing in 2021. What was this? NBA Hot Shots or something like this?
Top Shot.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think some of these sports ones, I know a few teams launching something around this soon. And it seems a little, because the athletes tend to be very crypto forward, let's say. And I haven't seen anybody really talk about it. And so it's pretty under the radar. And so that alone could be like, oh, wow, let's not miss out on this thing that we just found out about. So perhaps that's another option.
Cool. I feel like we veered off our serious ZK conversation into like what's cool next.
But we have the president of Helium here, as Mert would like to say. Yes.
People actually believe that. The other day they launched a free phone plan, and I put my phone code because they gave me an invite code for signing up free. And like seriously, like VC started reaching out to me like, hey, I'm sorry we couldn't work together on Helios, but like Helium looks pretty cool. And I was like, what the hell? I mean, what?
Nice. Mert, thanks so much for coming on the show. for sharing the story of, your involvement with Solana, Solana's evolution, this sort of survey of ZK being used and other kinds of cryptography being used in the Solana ecosystem, and some of your ideas about what could be coming next. Yeah, thanks for that.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Tarun, as always.
Yeah, excited to be here. Someone's got to be the unruly American in the podcast. So
I'm glad we had you. I want to say thank you to the podcast team, Rachel, Henrik, and Tanya, and to our listeners. Thanks for listening.